Here we are. The end of Misfit March Madness 2019. I hope you've been enjoying yourselves so far, because now it's time to get edgy and controversial. Goblin Slayer was passed around the anime community as the super mega edgelord that your mom wouldn't be happy to see. And the debate on whether it did a poor job in its first episode is a point of contention that differs based on which camp you're settled in. The people who believe that episode 1 was making the series into a super tryhard, and the camp that praised it for doing what it felt would set the tone. As someone who couldn't throw away her hat into the algorithm pool at the time, I argue various factors that align slightly different pertaining to both camps. So today I'm going to review Goblin Slayer and put to bed once and for all whether the controversy was truly worth it. At least in my eyes, but you know, I must draw it out for dramatic effects. In a world of fantasy, adventurers come far and wide to join guilds, to complete contracts for whatever jobs are available. An inexperienced priestess joins her first adventuring party, but comes into danger after her first adventurer contract involving goblins goes terribly, terribly wrong. After the rest of her party is wiped out, she is saved by a man known as Goblin Slayer, an adventurer whose only purpose in life is the eradication of goblins with an extreme iron vengeance. I want to start off by saying that first episode thoughts aside, Goblin Slayer is a well thought out isekai. Despite being set in a native fantasy world, it's able to tell a grounded message about the reality of cultural priority and why it's a festering mindfuck that needs to be re-examined. One reason I believe this is achieved is because of the show's timing and efficient awareness. Look, the isekai bandwagon has been going on for a long time now in the anime sphere. We have isekais that popularized the genre, ones that deconstructed it, shows that played it straight, and yes, even self-aware shows that bank on the viewer's prior knowledge to tell a more complex story. Or make fun of it, whatever comes first. Now see, Goblin Slayer knows that we know stuff. Like, say, the trope that all goblins are low-level monsters that get one-shot in other isekais. It flips up the hood of that trope, spans it across an entire conversation, and reframes the scenario into realities you wouldn't normally think about. Almost treating goblin kind in a sort of documentary nature. Realities, that's the buzzword here since isekai is all about that escapist fantasy. I feel that Goblin Slayer does a pretty good job in using reality just enough without forcing your enjoyment away from the anime. For those wanting to look deeper, it questions what real priorities of these isekai should worry about over others. Yes, the Demon Lord is a big bad foe that controls all monsters, but it's not like the common man will face him directly or even one of his generals compared to an invasive species like goblins that pillage, kill, and the other word that I can't say because of YouTube algorithm, on a daily occurrence. So then you ask, well, why aren't the goblins being stopped? Because cultural priority in these isekais put glory and pride over everything else. Goblins are low-level starter creatures that don't deserve the time of day to veterans, and they are left to inexperienced parties who, get this right, against people's conceptual lenses, die easily because goblins are still ferocious monsters and people die when they are killed. This is where the Goblin Slayer comes in, for he challenges the social stigma behind the farce of goblin awareness and why it's just as important to slay them as it would the Demon King. So long story short, he's the janitor of this guild. Janitors, and by extension McDonald's workers, aren't seen as lofty positions in real life, and are only a stepping stone to another adventure. But if no one did it, we wouldn't have trash being picked up or someone to yell at when the ice cream machine is down. Again! I was once a McDonald's worker too, I know how it feels. And I personally found the examples of fantasy to reality very versatile. From the second episode onward, the show explains a lot of detail, starting with the economic worth to risk factor of goblin hunting to the ownership of one's rank and how the good and bad connotations depend on the situation. Which brings me to my second enjoyment of the narrative, how it equally criticizes our titular character's own philosophy as much as the plot does the rest of society. The man known as Goblin Slayer is a tough nut in combat, as well as tougher in his social skills. While the anime takes ample time to craft a narrative highlighting his wit and cautionary beliefs, so too his flaws get tested pretty fairly, whether that be a lesson in not being so narrow-minded to the point that a veteran like himself forgoes the survival knowledge in slaying anything that's not mean and green, to realizing that, yeah, it's okay to be humble, but there's merit to holding yourself up when you have a higher rank, and whether he wants to believe it or not, he has to be more considerate of others. Not saying he doesn't do the basics, but at least in the first half of the anime, it was hard for our main character to even think about something other than his goblin vengeance. A vengeance so edgy that we now come back to the topic I avoided in the beginning. Was it worth the controversy? In my final consensus, no, but it doesn't mean that the series' flaws wouldn't be worth discussing. Regarding the first episode, my previous thoughts about how I thought it was dumb to show a group of naive adventurers solely because of clickbait is now something I no longer think, as I do understand why the tone was set conceptually. However, I still stand by the notion that episode 2 did a much better job of selling the show for me, leaving episode 1 to be left as something to reel you in. And reel people in it did, for on a completely objective level, it succeeded in getting many eyeballs on it. Though I wish the show wouldn't distract such eyeballs with useless waste of spaces like Cowgirl here. For a series that can make isekai refreshing in being part character study, part National Geographic for goblins, it fails in the aspect that thinking it needs to distract us with sexual scenery, when at the same time trying to be methodical in its usage of racy topics, brings me to a statement I've been wanting to say for a while now. Goblin Slayer is not an accessible show, and that's okay. From what it's trying to accomplish, I feel like it's a step backwards trying to pull this shit when its other features makes the show enjoyable on its own right. It's like adding fluff for fluff's sake. I know I'm asking the idiot's gospel, but besides money, why does an editing team feel the need to add tired anime tropes such as the sexualization of serious scenes even at the cost of tonal confusion? For me, the sexualization of the racy topics in concept worked for half of when Goblin Slayer brought it up, mostly in the first and last few episodes. But the whole sword maiden healing ritual, the cowgirl waking up naked, that dungeon trap with the elf just came off to me as jarring for a show trying to be semi-serious, therefore adding fuel to the controversial fire. Now, in its defense, the show did a good job framing the racy activities as bad, and how people, no matter the experience, can feel vulnerable. The concept was explored healthily, so its inclusion in general was important. But to all the people that said, people are weak sauce for not being able to handle this shit, I argue Goblin Slayer poked the controversial bear, therefore it gets no sympathy from me from the reaction it got. It was inevitable. To put this thought to rest, my entire point is, anime doesn't have to reach so far to appeal to everyone if its focus is there. Otherwise, you just get confused situations like the controversy we saw. But then again, all of that gets blown into the water when you realize this show is better in written form than animated. Yes, I'm speaking the witch's nonsense. For this particular series, I converted my anime adaptation ways into that of a manga reader. Light novel, not so much. I'm getting there on my weeb-based evolution. Just give me time. Like the opening statement in a paragraph, the plot and design of Goblin Slayer is much better suited for printed digestion. Did the anime get me to read the manga? Yes, in an adaptation's concern, it did its job, but between the detail of its characters and visuals, it's that flow that felt lost when it became animated. Something similar I felt in another anime like Log Horizon, not solely because of its animation, but its overall written presentation. Speaking of presentation, I loved both sides of its visual and structural integrity that combined all the themes together. For example, the intentional reason why no one in the show goes by a name is for two reasons. A, to keep our minds detached from the persona of characters to tell its messaging, and B, to emulate a conceptual immersion of D&D likenesses. The gods of this world are players at a table moving these characters around dungeons, that when you really think about it, feels awfully like a genuine campaign. I loved how this is sometimes visually seen via this grayscale effect, only leaving certain pieces of clothing colored, whether the Goblin Slayer was deducing some sort of strategy. Everything else, like the gritty action, that soul-burning helmet of his, or thicker shading of characters from the scenery, just adds to that fantasy ambiance, to an eerie but great effect. The presentation also ties to the very end of the anime that spouts that quote alluding to the idea of campaigns, that the Goblin Slayer was just a wacky character someone made up, and no one expected to go very far. But between being loved for his interesting traits and his own efforts, he refused to let someone else decide his fate, to cast his die. And I feel that it's the visuals that truly make it pop. Other than that, I don't really have anything really to say on the music or the soundtrack, for it kinda coasted by me in my couple of watches. So I'll just move on to the final thoughts, right after this quick break. And now it's time for another fun-filled segment of Community Corner, the time where I highlight other outlets in the anime community in hopes that other people will have a look-see. This one goes out to my colleague Slaps, because with how much fun I had with our collab, this was only the natural conclusion. But anywho, Slaps is an anime YouTuber whose content ranges from the dank to the dandy. Sometimes it's a shit post about Energy Sword Sunday! Sometimes it's a thoughtful commentary about the importance of consistent tone. What will it be next time? Who knows? So if you want to know more about a YouTuber who may or may not slap his shoes against the wall of discovery, then I heed you to check out Slap Shoes on YouTube today. Though I still think spoiler culture is dumb, he at least has shown me a possibility of it being not so bad. Now if you know of any other creative outlets in this world of anime, comment about them down below or at Shannen on Twitter with the hashtag CommunityCorner and tell me all about it. In this time where community is more important than ever, while I may be one girl on the internet, I will always try my best. In my opinion, Goblin Slayer is a show that talks about the realities within fantasy. Its strong themes about character structure and problem solving could only be achieved because the creator was calculative with the narrative decisions made, which I find ironic given how complex the titular character is in his entirety, and how the show just as much criticizes his philosophy as he does the social mentality against goblins. While some choices distract the show's theme, and you could even go as far as to say Goblin Slayer forgoes accessibility to make a point, I still appreciate the writer's effort, even if I still believe it works better in print form. So, after 5 weeks of hunting goblins around the country and getting used to slathering guts on my clothes so I don't get detected, I award Goblin Slayer with the recommendation to try it and a watchability rating of M for mature. This series was compelling enough for me, of all people, to read other source materials, and whether you think the risky business in episode 1 turned you off, don't be ashamed, because everyone has their own cup of tea, and this might not be yours, and that's okay. For anime alternatives, well, let me say what's gonna come in my brain right now. The obvious stuff like Berserk, Is It Wrong to Pick Up Girls in the Dungeon, and so on and so forth, but everyone says those. As for Haitegenso no Grimgar, I don't like that one much, so what else could I say? Alright, Claymore! Watch Claymore. It was 2000's Edge before 2000's Edge was cool. And finally, let's go with some Darker Than Black for good messaging, because nothing says commentary like a Chinese electric Batman cleaning house when others say no. But between all that, there must be something that might pique your fancy. Before we go, I want to thank again my editor of View and Alike for always being there for me to help push out content. I really wouldn't have done this without him. As we move forward to the next month, keep on looking out for our channel updates sometime real soon, because there's a lot I need to cover. And to make sure you stay updated, remember to like, comment, and subscribe to the Anime Misfit today, where we duct tape Spring Break ahead of schedule to make it last longer. Follow me on all my social media, and if you are feeling super generous, support me on my Ko-fi or Patreon, cause I gotta make that bread too. But that's a wrap for I, and hopefully you, Lamp, can finally take a nice deserved siesta. So see you guys in the next video. Shannen out!